Hi friends, let's talk about diastasis recti and how to do a diastasis self-check. First of all, do you need to do a diastasis self-check? No, not if you don't want to. Not everyone needs to. Sometimes we rely so heavily on measuring the gap and all the measurement stuff. And it's nice. Numbers are nice, right? We like looking at the number on the scale and the number on this and the number on that. However, if you are someone who gets obsessed with that number and gets really focused on, oh, I need to improve that number, I encourage you to actually don't measure yourself. And the reason being, the gap, the diastasis recti gap may or may not close fully with strength training. We know that strengthening your core absolutely helps and gives you your best chance, along with all of the other lifestyle factors, including getting adequate sleep, which we know can be very hard after having a baby. But getting to bed earlier, that's something that you may have control over. Getting enough water, nutrition, protein, collagen, all of those, vitamin C, all of those things that actually help us heal our bodies. Also stress management, bowel health, decreasing our constipation, all of those things can help our diastasis heal. So can things like posture, breathing, lifting strategies. So those are all things that I would focus on first before jumping into focusing on just measuring the width of the gap. However, for the purposes of this video, let's do a diastasis self-check. First, we're going to do it in different positions. So traditionally it's measured lying flat on your back with your knees bent and you measure the gap. However, life doesn't happen just lying flat on our back. Life happens in movement. So I encourage you to test yourself through at least 2 to 3 different movements and to see how your gap feels in those movements. Let's start with standing. Just because I'm standing right now, it makes it easy. Okay, so we're gonna start with our xiphoid process. That's where the rib cage meets right at the middle, that little dangly bit right there underneath our sternum. And you're gonna apply tension with 2 fingertips just in the midline. So not vertically, but turn your fingers sideways like this. And you're gonna apply that pressure. And you should feel a decent amount of tension, right? It shouldn't feel like you can just poke your hand right through. If it does, make note of that too, right? You may need to push through some of the superficial fat and skin aside. So push through that stuff and then feel that tension, okay? And just mentally make a note of that. Then work your way down from here to your pubic bone, right? And see if that tension changes as you go down. Does it increase? Does it decrease? Does it stay the exact same? So if you're making your way down, that feels pretty much the same. Great. You don't have a diastasis in standing. If you're working your way down like me and you feel a bit of a gap right there at the belly button, you can say, how wide is that gap? You're like, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 fingers, between 1 and 2. Okay, make note of that. Now we're gonna test in a different position. So we're gonna test in sitting and we're gonna see whether that's the same situation in sitting. All right, move the camera down. Now let's talk about diastasis recti in sitting. So in sitting, I'm gonna do the exact same thing I did in standing. I'm gonna start at the top and work my way down and say, you know what? There's a little bit less tension now, not just at the belly button, but about a finger or 2 above the belly button, I feel less tension. Definitely less at the belly button, and below the belly button seems fine for me. You might be different. You might notice no tension or no change in tension up here, but then right below, right here, you may notice an increase in tension. Now, if you have something called a hernia or an umbilical hernia, a hernia is when there is an actual hole in that connective tissue, which is where the linea alba sits. So if you have a hole there, you're gonna feel really soft at that spot. And so that's what I feel at the belly button where I have an umbilical hernia. So I just make a note of that and I notice how soft it feels where the gap is. And so I noticed personally for me, less tension around here in sitting than in standing. And when we think about that, that makes sense because it takes more core work for us to stand than it does for us to just sit, right? Sitting is an easier movement, less work needed, which means less core on. So do we get stressed about that? No, that's just fine, right? Just like there's less tension in your calves and in your quads when you're just sitting than when you're standing. So now let's go down to the floor and we're gonna do a diastasis self-check on the floor, lying down on our back. And you can do this in multiple positions. You can be in this position checking, lying on your side checking. And why would we check different positions? First, it's a bit of curiosity for me, and it's to see which positions may need more training and support, right? And where your diastasis really needs more support. Now, so far, before we get to the floor, we've talked about the tension and the width, right? Whether it's 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3, 4, 5, how many fingers can you actually feel, in between the six-pack muscles, which sit on either side of the midline. The other thing that we haven't talked about so far is the depth. How deep can you push your fingers in? Can it go just into your nail bed? Can it go to your first knuckle, your second knuckle, all the way to your knuckles of your hand? How deep can that go? In standing, typically, and we're not talking about fat. And so when you're self-checking yourself, most of us have fat here. And when you're self-checking yourself, if you're not trained in this, you may think, oh my gosh, I can go in all the way to here, or that means I have a really deep diastasis. You may not, because sometimes it's just fat, right? So that's why I don't want you to get too, dwelling on these numbers. But this is a learning opportunity for you, right? Okay, so now let's lie down on your back. Okay, and when you have a diastasis, it doesn't mean that you have to avoid things like crunches or sit-ups or any exercise permanently. You can get back to everything, right, with adequate training. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a self-check. In this position, starting at the top, poke, 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 and I already feel less tension up here than I did in standing. And this is our baseline, right? This is like our perfect point. We're going to start there and compare everything down here to this point here, which is right at the top where the rib cage starts to split, right below our sternum. Okay, so we're going to work my way down, and I'm like, yes, lots of gap here. Maybe for me, 2 fingers to 3 fingers. And remember that some element of space is normal. Our muscles don't just connect right at the middle. They have a bit of space where the connective tissue sits. So 1 to 2 finger widths is fairly normal, and sometimes we try to make everything sound like it's a problem, and we're like, oh, we have a 1 finger gap. That's not a gap, that's just part of normal. And most of us don't measure these things before we have children, so we only ever notice them after we have children. And that's why I want to focus less on the measurement and more on the actual, let's strengthen your body so you feel good doing all of the things that you want to be doing. All right, let's get down to, the spot that I felt was the softest earlier. And so I'm going to say, let's say I have 2 to 3 finger width space. Okay, now let's try adding a bit of load. Let's try moving, like crunching my head up. And oh my goodness, I feel that gap close right up, and now I only have 1 finger width space. That's pretty good, right? So we want to see change when you start to add load. If that's not enough load, try lifting both legs up and see how that feels. And play around with it. We want to feel more tension in the midline when we're adding exercises in. If you feel like it's still really, really soft and not doing much, it means you're not adding enough tension for you to actually feel that load. Or you may need some more different cueing or breath work in order to get there, okay? And so tension there is not a bad thing. We want tension. Tension allows us to, tension means that there's stimulation happening at the muscle level, at the fascia level, because diastasis is not necessarily, the whole problem with diastasis isn't just at the fascia level. That's what we notice in terms of the gap and the depth of the gap. But the actual issue is that the entire abdominal wall has been stretched due to pregnancy. And so the entire abdominal wall needs to be strengthened postpartum. And so that's what I want you to focus on, along with some of that lifestyle stuff, or all of the lifestyle stuff that I talked about at the beginning. If you need help dealing with your diastasis recti, managing your diastasis recti, I would be thrilled to support you. You can reach me at www.thepassionatephysio.ca, and you can find me on Instagram at thepassionatephysio, and send me a DM, introduce yourself, and let me know how I can support you best. I offer virtual physiotherapy and fitness coaching services worldwide, physiotherapies across Ontario and fitness coachings worldwide, all virtual. And I also offer my 8-week small group postpartum return to exercise program, which happens a couple times a year, two to three times a year. So if the timing works out well for you to join that, amazing. But if not, I offer tons of virtual one-on-one services as well as my base fitness membership, which is my Be Active, Strong, and Energized fitness membership, which is for people who want to strengthen their bodies, who are beyond that early postpartum recovery stage where they understand how to activate their core and how to just move their bodies in general, and now want to build and focus on building strength. So people usually join my base fitness membership after they've done prep or after they've worked with me one-on-one, or if they're like 3 years postpartum, they're like, I just need a regular routine again, please help. And so that's where I can help support you the best. I'm so excited for you. Thank you for watching this. This was meant to be a 5-minute video, but I love talking about this stuff. And so it ended up being about over 11 minutes. Thank you for watching. And if this was helpful for you, please let me know. Leave a comment, send me a DM, share this with a friend, let a friend know. I would so appreciate that. Thank you.